Hello again, or if you're new, welcome to Chaos at Noah, where last time we were introduced to Fez as she sang at the Phantasm concert that we'd gone to. Then we went and bought a cell phone with Nanami and went home to find out from Grim that a fourth new gen case had been discovered. And now, we proceed on to Chapter 3. Late night Shibuya, 4 a.m. Despite being named the city that never sleeps, very few people were currently present at its most popular locale, Scramble Crossing. Instead, many taxis were parked in their place, ready to carry away the drunks unwilling to wait for the first train of the morning. A generous amount of the drivers were reclined in their seats, napping. The more diligent drivers leaned against their steering wheels as their eyes stared idly toward the hotspots, most frequent ones being Center Guy and the 107 building. However, they were not trying to ascertain whether or not any of the passerby were potential customers. Instead, they focused intently on the movements of the sanitation workers who had arrived about 30 minutes before. The 5 to 6 men were thought to be sanitation workers due to their yellow armbands, each of which had Sanitation Reporter written on them. It was very likely that, without the armbands, no one would have recognized them as such, for there was something particularly odd about the men. They were all wearing black suits. Furthermore, ever since their arrival, they had yet to show any signs of cleaning at all. Instead, one man held a strange instrument resembling a pendulum, and the surrounding men appeared to be measuring something. This was not restricted to just the one area, however. From the center of Scramble Crossing to the very edge of it, they left no spot untouched, writing all their findings down on various scraps of paper. Even now, they were taking measurements from directly beneath the traffic signals, silently observing the movements of the pendulum. At last, the instrument let out a small chime.
地点 L2 の8、0.62メガ GE、ハイスコアです。
Location L2-8, 0.62 Mega GE, the highest score yet.
先月より38ポイントもアップか。思った通りだ。
It's risen 38 points higher than last month's, just as expected. But there was no one present in the early morning Shibuya to pay attention to the odd mumbling and behavior. The taxi drivers would speed off as soon as patrons boarded their cars, quickly forgetting about the mysterious sanitation workers. The drunks were hardly conscious, leaving them unable to see anything around them to begin with. Female nightlife workers who had just clocked out, finally free from the stress of smiling at repulsive drunkards, jumped into taxis to get home as soon as possible. Thus, not a single person was around to notice that the government had not scheduled any plans whatsoever for cleaning to take place that morning. Even after the weekend had passed, the uproar brought on by the fourth new gen case, now dubbed the Vampire Incident, hadn't even come close to calming down. A man's corpse had been found with all of its blood taken out of it, leaving the surface of the body a sickly, inhuman shade of green. It had been discovered in a bathroom at Shibuya Station, a part of the Inokashira line. In addition, it was uncovered that a photograph of the corpse had been posted to an online auction, and considering the abnormality and brutality of the murder, it was inevitable that both the mass media and @channel jumped on it. Special attention had been paid to the headline of the auction page, which read, "Type B blood in short supply." Tissue packs advertising an upcoming blood drive had been handed out in large quantities in front of Shibuya Station a few days prior to the incident, and the exact same message had been written on them. I had one of those tissue packs on hand. Reading back over it again now, the insanely strange words didn't read like an ad for a blood drive anymore. They read like some kind of advanced message of the crime. The police had supposedly been searching for the part-timers handing out the tissue packs, but they had yet to find any of them. However, there was one area where the vampire differed pretty heavily from the previous cases. While there had already been elements of it in the crucifixion case, the intent for it to be a theatrical crime was much more obvious with this one. A few media outlets had begun clamoring for increased police presence via patrols, or for a late-night curfew for people under 18. But the number of young people visiting the city showed no sign of declining. They were just as packed as usual, with people flooding every nook and cranny of Center Guy and Scramble Crossing. The internet was so thirsty for news, a group of people trying to be Snake had snuck into Shibuya late at night to post live updates. And there had also been a phrase that was trending among the city's younger population. Whose eyes are those eyes? It wasn't just online either. The phrase had penetrated the ranks for each and every DQN walking around Shibuya. On at channel, it had become common practice to tack the phrase onto anything, regardless of if it was related or not. This week's Ep of Blood tune won't have much Seirata on whose eyes are those eyes. The new patch's weapons are so weak they're actually unusable whose eyes are those eyes. What whose eyes are those eyes is that from? And so on. To people my age, New Gen was probably just something new and exciting to follow, the newest shit show to obsess over. But to me, it was the most aggravating thing possible. Regardless, a whole 3 days had passed since the vampire case, so I'd been able to calm down a little. Of course, there was still a nagging uneasiness in the corner of my mind, but by losing myself in ESO over the weekend, I'd been able to temporarily forget about all that irritating, inexplicable garbage. Even though I'd had to go to school today, I'd been able to get through my classes by either sleeping through them or thinking about the stats and frame data of ESO's rarest items. I guess I'd leveled up a little bit. And so, on my way home from school, I stopped by At Cafe for the first time in a while. It made me happy to see that the room I usually used, room 37, was vacant and ready for me. The last time I'd set foot in it was at least 2 weeks ago, meaning that this was the longest gap I'd ever had between visits. The sour breeze flowing from the air conditioner, the manga stained with the smell of tobacco, how comfortable it was to sit back in the recliner, the snores of old men cutting through the silent, still air. It all provided the store's interior with an aura of pure nostalgia.
ルーム37の PC のチャットログを調べさせてもらいました。
I inspected the chat logs on room 37's PC.
そこから分かったことは、
And that's when I realized
あなた一人の自作自演。
both members of that chat log were you.
将軍は
This shogun
あなた自身。
is you. I hadn't seen Yua since then. We were in different grades, and I didn't go to school that often, so it made sense why we hadn't come across each other.
ユアの妄想はすごいよ。
Yua's got some incredible delusions. I couldn't help but pity her. She was clearly sick in the head. I'd be better off just leaving her be. Besides, meeting her at all had been a freak accident. Over the past 2 weeks or so, I'd been dragged into all sorts of random bullshit. Before then, my everyday life had been completely vanilla, and Misumi-kun was pretty much the only one who talked to me. So why was it that basically nothing but weird, inexplicable bullshit had been happening to me recently? I wanted to avoid thinking about that garbage as much as humanly possible. That dying message had to be just a coincidence. The words were all pretty common after all. If I'd thought of it, there was no reason someone else wouldn't have been able to as well. I had no interest in who that message was aimed at. No, I couldn't be interested. That was what I told myself anyhow. Suddenly, something started ringing nearby. I jolted up in surprise, and a shudder ran through me as I stayed rooted in my recliner. It was the sound of a phone ringing, but whose was it? Because the store was so quiet, the electronic sound rang out all the louder. I looked around, but I couldn't locate a phone anywhere.
もしかして。
A thought came to mind, and I fished around in my bag. Sure enough, the ringing was coming from the cell phone I'd bought just a few days prior. I glanced warily at the LCD display. Normally, the caller's name would be displayed there. Was it a good idea to answer? I didn't like talking to people that much, so probably not. Who the hell was calling me anyway? I hadn't told anybody my phone number yet. The only people who knew it even existed were my family, with Nanami's nosy ass making sure to put them in my address book. When one of the people registered my address book called, their name should display, meaning that whoever was calling wasn't a family member. So, who was this? The phone kept on ringing persistently. Did people who had phones usually force people to listen to the ringing for this long? I'd never used one of them before, so I wouldn't know, but it was incredibly annoying. To suddenly invade someone's privacy like this, cursing them with an obnoxious ringing until they picked up. A socially acceptable way to invade someone's privacy. That was exactly why I didn't want one of these stupid things. Oh, it stopped. Relieved, I checked the screen again. Missed calls, 1, was displayed on it. I had no interest in returning this rando's call, so I decided to leave it be. It'd be a pain in the ass if this happened again in the future, so I should really figure out how to set up my voicemail. Ugh, cell phones were such a pain in the ass. I didn't even like phones to begin with. I mean, come on, they were freaky as hell. How exactly were you supposed to know if the person you were talking to on the other end was the actual person you thought it was? With how prevalent fraud was nowadays, were people actually taking the proper measures to make sure they were talking to the right person? I couldn't help but wonder how people would be able to calmly have a conversation with someone who might be an impersonator. Even if I understood the gist of how it worked, it was hard to believe that my voice could somehow reach distant places through a phone line. When you talk on the phone, your voice is temporarily converted into electrical signals. They pass through the phone's lines until they reach the recipient, where they are then restored back to normal. That's when they become audible. In order to talk on the phone, you need to go through this conversion process at least twice. With a cell phone, your voice is first converted into electrical signals, then it travels to a nearby base station via radio waves, which then run through normal phone lines to the switching station, then to the closest base station to the recipient, before finally arriving at their cell phone right after. It was a bizarre, complicated process. If my voice was replaced by electrical signals, could the other party really hear my voice word for word exactly as I'd said it? In fact, wasn't it possible that in the conversion process, my voice and my words could be transformed into something completely different? For instance, if I called Nanami, but instead of connecting to her, it connected to some strange, shady facility. And there, I would end up talking to somebody I'd never met who was only pretending to be Nanami. Maybe they wouldn't even be a person, but a computer instead. That was the big reason why phone calls freaked me out so much. They were even scarier than talking to someone face to face. When I'd logged into ESO as Lieselot, as was often the case, 3 hours passed by in the blink of an eye. It'd been 2 weeks since I'd last used her, but she made for a pretty good support, so I was feeling pretty satisfied. I left that cafe in a good mood and started heading home. Center guy was as packed and noisy as usual, which irritated me. The bright lights illuminating the streets from the various shops made it hard to believe it was nighttime. And at the end of the well-lit road, despite the crowds, I clearly saw her, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. That one girl. In the midst of so many people, she glared directly at me. Right smack in the middle of Center Guy, where people were coming and going without reprieve, where it was difficult to even walk straight. She stood still, resting the gigantic sword she carried on her shoulder. The spectacle was completely absurd. And yet, no one paid her sword any mind. The stream of people flowed right past her with no change in demeanor. She was the girl I'd seen at 107. She'd been there when Nanami was dragging me around to buy a cell phone. The shape of her sword, her Suime uniform, her long black hair, everything matched perfectly. Back then, she had been standing at the top of the stairs in front of 107, watching the passers-by come and go. and I remembered the sharpness of her glare. I had met her once before, at school. She had these almond-shaped eyes and clean-cut, model-like features, and yet they only served to make her seem all the more unapproachable, and it was all capped off by that long, silky black hair that stretched all the way down to her waist. She was Girl B, the one who had so rudely probed me in the corridors after school one day, asking me who I was. Come to think of it, why was she glaring at me? Thinking maybe it wasn't me she was looking at, I turned around. Usually, when something like this happened, more often than not, they were just looking at someone who happened to be behind me. But that wasn't the case here. The one she was glaring at, her gaze filled with intense hostility, had to be me. I froze. I knew now what it felt like to be someone's prey. Glaring back was out of the question. I was always terrible at looking people in the eyes, so I couldn't help but stare down at the pavement. I should run. Normally, I'd go home by taking a left at Scramble Crossing, where she was standing, and then I would end up next to Bookfat. But today, I headed for the station instead. There were a lot of people there, but I'd rather that than deal with some scary 3D girl harassing me. Hell, she might even try to mug me. Or maybe she was only feigning being alone, and she actually had several DQNs lurking nearby, waiting for her to lure me in so they could beat the shit out of me. To be honest, they'd probably one-shot me. Like, I'd fall for that. I swiveled to the right, only to be caught completely off guard.
あ、え
Somehow, the girl was right in front of me. Flustered, I turned back around to look at Scramble Crossing. She was no longer there. I looked in front of me once again. The girl with the sword was still glaring at me, just as she had been before. What the hell? When'd she get around me? Legs could only move so fast. That was practically teleportation. And besides, how could she have predicted that I'd turn around in the first place?
おい
Hey, you. Her voice reached my ears with extreme clarity. I frantically looked around me. I wanted to think she was talking to someone else, even though I already knew full well who she was talking to. I searched for anyone else she could be directing that "hey you" towards. But obviously there was no one. A number of businessmen walking by glanced at Girl B inquisitively, only to realize she wasn't talking to them and walked away. Girl B, who had been standing there imposingly the entire time, took a sudden step toward me. That was all the confirmation I needed. Girl B had been targeting me after all.
お前見えるのか
I'm talking to you. You see it? Rude as ever. In my 17 years of life, I could probably count the number of times a girl had talked to me like this on one hand. Well, I guess there were times when Kirimiya Tsubaki, aka Tsunko, had talked to me like that, but it was in a tsundere kind of way. Granted, Tsunko was just a 2D character from the Eroge Tell Me doll. Girl B kept getting closer and closer as those stupid thoughts raced through my head. Why does she feel so intimidating, even though she's a girl, I wondered. But the reasons were simple. The sharp look in her eyes, and the gigantic sword she was carrying. For a sword, it had a fairly unique shape. It was the kind of thing that operated on anime logic. It had an awesome design, but if you actually used it in real life, it'd be completely unusable. It had to be from some mecha anime. Had there been any mecha anime that started airing recently? Even though I knew it was a prop from some random anime cosplay, it still looked incredibly sharp and solid. Like, if you even so much as touched it, it would slice your fingers clean off. What a strange sword.
見えるのかと聞いている
I asked you if you can see it. Girl B had already cut the distance between us by 2 meters. If she swung her sword, it would hit me. Flustered, I took a step back, but it was too late. Girl B closed the distance further and further. Go for a good delusion this time. She'd actually swung the sword. Cowering on the spot, I covered my head. If I hadn't dodged it, it would have hit my head for sure. I doubted it would have cut me, but with that kind of force behind it, it would have given me a concussion and permanently dented my skull. I hated pain.
何をするだ
What the hell are you doing? I was so shaken that my speech had gotten all messed up. Girl B looked down at me coldly. Man, she was really close. Her bare legs were right in front of me, and at this angle, I could almost see up her skirt.
やはり見えるのか。
You can see it, can't you?
すいません。見てないです。
I'm sorry, I didn't see anything. I frantically lowered my gaze. I knew for a fact she was going to accuse me of looking at her panties. But I didn't see them, I swear. I almost saw them, but I didn't. Really. Besides, 3D panties didn't get me off anyways. The only panties I fapped to are either 2D or belong to figures.
嘘だ。絶対見た。
You're lying. You had to have seen.
さっきからチラチラ見てただろ。
I've been glancing over and over for a while now.
本当に見てない。
I didn't, I swear.
ふん。
And then, for some reason I couldn't comprehend, Girl B slipped off one of her shoes, and then she began to take off one of her knee socks. In the midst of this, the area under her skirt threatened to become visible yet again, leaving me at a loss as to where to look. I tried to find an opening to escape, but Girl B refused to take her eyes off of me as she continued removing her sock. The now barefoot girl assumed an imposing stance, curving her lips in a scornful manner. I'll make you confess. What? Suddenly, Girl B's bare foot stepped directly on my crotch. The sudden humiliation rendered me hopelessly embarrassed.
ほら、どうだ。グッ。
There we go. How does that feel?
やめ。
Stop. The people walking around didn't even look at us. Why couldn't there be at least one person who came to my rescue? What a cold society we lived in.
だんだん大きくなってきたぞ。
Having this happen to me, and right smack in the middle of Center Guy, it was mortifying, but I was enjoying it.
あー、ダメ。
Stop!
答えろ。見えるんだな。
Answer me. You see it, don't you?
ディソードが。
The D sword. When I came back to myself, I couldn't immediately grasp what was going on, leaving me to blankly stare up at Girl B. She was still wearing her shoes, and she wasn't stepping on my crotch or anything. What the... Had that been a delusion? So she wasn't trying to accuse me of seeing her panties? Do a negative delusion this time. She'd actually swung the sword. Cowering on the spot, I covered my head. If I hadn't dodged it, it would have hit my head for sure. I doubted it would have cut me, but with that kind of force behind it, it would have given me a concussion and permanently dented my skull. I hated pain.
何をするだ。
What the hell are you doing? I was so shaken that my speech got messed up.
やはり間違いない。
There's no mistaking it.
お前、私が見えているんだろ。
You can see me, can't you?
はい。
Yeah? It said you can see me, right? Me? As in the person standing in front of me? Girl B? Suddenly, Girl B's expression twisted in misery, and she crouched down in front of me. With her eyes on the same level as mine, her gaze almost seemed to plead with me.
私、誰にも見つけてもらえなくて。
No one would ever find me.
どれだけ声を出しても、誰にも届かなくて。
No matter how loud I screamed, no one would hear me.
体はすり抜けちゃうし、
My body just passed through them.
寒いし。
It's so cold.
ほら、見て。私、足も透けちゃって。
Here, look. You can see through my legs.
自分に何が起きたのかさっぱりわからなくて。
Something happened to me, but I have no idea what.
もう何年も何十年もこの場所をさまよっていたような気がする。
I feel like I've been wandering around this place for years, for decades. Oh god, was she a ghost? No, that was ridiculous. I didn't have the power to see ghosts. I didn't have anything even like that.
ずっと探してた。
I've been searching for so long
私を見つけてくれる人、
for the one who would find me.
ありがとう
Thank you.
ありがとう。
Thank you so much.
お礼に
As a reward.
お前に取り付いてやる。
I'll possess you.
答えろ。見えるんだな。
Answer me. You see it, don't you?
ディソードが。
The D sword.
え
When I came back to myself, I couldn't immediately grasp what was going on, leaving me to blankly stare up at Girl B. She wasn't crying, her legs weren't transparent, and her hands were just normal hands. What the? Had that been a delusion? No delusion this time. She'd actually swung the sword. Cowering on the spot, I covered my head. If I hadn't dodged it, it would have hit my head for sure. I doubted it would have cut me, but that kind of force behind it, it could have given me a concussion and permanently dented my skull. I hated pain.
何をするだ
What the hell are you doing? I was so shaken that my speech got messed up. Girl B looked down at me coldly. This chick wasn't normal, waving a sword around in the middle of a crowd. Wait, was she in the midst of a hit and run? Was she a spree killer? Or could she be the new gen culprit? Or the demon girl's accomplice?
助けて
Help.
殺さないで
Don't kill me. The next thing I knew, I was trembling. I felt like I was this close to pissing myself out of sheer terror.
何を勘違いしている。
What don't you understand?
私はただ見えるのかと聞いているだけだ。
I'm only asking if you can see it. What the hell was she talking about? If I said I couldn't see it, would she kill me? How was I supposed to answer if I didn't even know what I was supposed to be seeing?
少し落ち着け。
Calm down.
もう一度聞くぞ。
I'll ask again.
この剣、ディソードが見えるのか。
This sword. This D sword. Can you see it?
え
Huh? D sword? It was the first time I'd ever heard that word. It had to be referring to the sword she was holding, but I decided to just nod. I mean, I obviously could see it. There'd be something wrong with me if I couldn't. Lugging around a sword that large and conspicuous, and in center guy no less. I'd be willing to accept it if this was Akiba, but in Shibuya of all places?
そうか。
I see.
お前も集められたんだな。
So you too have been gathered. Gathered? Who? And by who? At the very least, I was definitely here voluntarily.
エラーを見たことがあるか。
Have you seen an error before? In Japanese, please? Was what I'd wanted to say, but unsurprisingly, I wasn't brave enough. Then again, if I said the wrong thing, she'd probably stab me, so... Regardless, this chick had been spouting nothing but nonsense ever since she'd first opened her mouth.
見たら教えろ。
Tell me if you see one. After she said that, Girl B turned around. Her skirt fluttered in the breeze, and I could almost see her panties. I hurriedly shut my eyes.
私は3年の青い瀬名。
I'm Aoi Senna, a third year.
駅前の電車にいる。
You'll find me on the train in front of the station. I opened my eyes. The girl calling herself Senna had vanished. I was completely stunned, and it wasn't until I arrived back at my base that I realized that I hadn't understood a single goddamn word she'd said. Despite everything going on, I had to go to school 3 times this week. Somebody kill me. A mysterious screech resounded from far away. The sudden nature of it made me jump, and when I slowly looked in the direction it came from... Shit.
お兄
Big bro? Nanami rushed towards me with staggering speed. I tried to run away, but it was too late. She'd already circled around me and blocked my path. She always did have amazing reflexes.
ちょっとなんで妹見て逃げるの
Hey, why'd you try and run away when you saw me? Maybe because you're incredibly annoying?
あ、そうやってすぐ黙るし
Jeez, you're always so quick to clam up like that. Damn it, why had she decided to go to Suime of all places? That decision had done nothing but cause me endless pain and suffering. Whenever she ran into me on the way to school, she always stuck her nose in my business without fail.
ねえねえ携帯どう使ってる使ってないでしょ
Hey, do you like your new phone? Are you using it? Let me guess, probably not, right?
買ってからもう何日か経ってるけど一度も家にかけてこないもんね
It's been days and days since we bought it, but you haven't called home a single time. That's how I know. Doing my best to break free, I started speed walking, but Nanami was determined to keep up.
家に生存報告の電話ぐらいしなよそのために買ったんだから
You could at least call home and let us know you're alive, you know. That's why we bought it in the first place.
どうしても嫌ならそのナナの携帯にかけるだけでもいいからさ
And if you can't bear to do that for whatever reason, you can just call me.
お母さん心配してるんだからね
His mom's worried about you.
そもそもちゃんとご飯食べてんのどうせコンビニ弁当ばっかなんでしょ
Have you been eating right? Why'd I even ask? You've probably been surviving off nothing but stuff from the convenience store.
やっぱお兄に一人暮らしは無理なんだよ家に帰ってきなよ
I knew you'd be helpless living on your own. Just come back home, you butt.
ナナがどんな気持ちでお兄の様子見に行ってるか分かってる
Do you have any idea how I feel whenever I come to check up on you?
いつも心配でしょうがないんだからね
I'm always so worried about you. I can't help it. Shut up! The hell's your problem? Are you my mom or something? And stop talking about shit like this when we're on the side of the road. It's humiliating. I'd already been feeling like shit, yet this bitch had somehow managed to come along and make me feel even worse. There was nothing on this earth more embarrassing than walking to school with your younger sister. A slightly tense atmosphere hung in the air between us as we walked side by side towards school. I looked at Nanami to see if there was any chance of escape before we reached the gate. Even though she had been yammering on and on just a bit ago, she had fallen completely silent, now walking with an absent-minded look on her face. It even looked like her eyes weren't really focused on the road, but that was probably just my imagination. Her footsteps were unsteady. Something must be wrong with her, I suspected. She kept on swaying back and forth, and about a moment later, she stumbled right out onto the road, right as a car came racing toward her.
危ない
Hey, watch out! Panicking, I grabbed Nanami's arm and yanked her back. The horn of a car blared as it sped by. She just barely avoided getting run over.
お前何やってんだ
What the hell are you doing, dumbass?
ああれ
Huh? Huh? Nanami blinked a few times, then tilted her head to the side.
ナナ今なんであんなこと
Why did I do that?
あれ
Huh? I was at a loss for words. She was an honest-to-God fucking idiot. She didn't even understand her own actions. And for the record, that wasn't Moe, not even close.
何やってるんだよ車にひかれたいのか
Seriously, what were you doing? Are you trying to get run over?
車なんて来てた
Was there a car? Yes, there was a car! What was up with this total fucking ditz of a sister?
ねえお兄今ヒュンヒュンヒュンっていう音聞こえなかった
Hey, that whirring sound just now, didn't you hear it? What? What was she talking about? I hadn't heard jack shit.
その音聞いてたらね、なんだかぼんやりした感覚になって。
When I heard that sound, my head went all fuzzy for some reason.
で、あそこに
And over there. Nanami pointed at the corner of the road.
お父さんとお母さんが立ってて、ナナを呼んでたの。
I saw Mom and Dad. They were calling me. When I looked to where Nanami was pointing, I didn't see our parents. Instead, I saw a creepy man standing in that exact spot. He wore a plaid shirt, fingerless gloves, jeans rolled up at the bottom, and white sneakers. He had a rucksack on his back that was filled to bursting. He looked like an otaku plucked straight out of Akihabara. Capping off his outfit, he was holding a video camera in one hand. Do you have a voyeur fetish or some shit?
おい、他人を指さすな。
Hey, don't point at strangers. God, what a rude-ass sister. Besides, it'd make no sense for her parents to be here in the first place. They lived in Shimokitazawa, after all.
おかしいな。確かに呼ばれたのに。
That's so weird. I know I heard my name. The man started looking our way. Then he pointed the camera lens at us. What the hell was wrong with him?
行くぞ、ナナミ。
Let's go, Nanami. Frightened, I quickly ran from the scene, leaving Nanami behind.
あ、お兄、ちょっと待ってよ。
Hey, wait for me. I'd continued to ignore Nanami until we got to school, upon which I ditched her to walk down the noisy as ever hallway toward my classroom. When walking down the hallway, stay along the edge. Don't walk too fast or too slow. Don't make eye contact with anyone. Those were the 3 rules I always followed. That was how I didn't stand out at school. I transformed myself into an existence akin to air itself. It was the secret to my success.
よ、タク。
Hey, Daku. Yet people like him definitely made it hard for it to actually work. Catching up to me from behind, Misumi-kun greeted me in his normal, overly friendly fashion by clapping a hand on my shoulder.
おいっす。
What's up?
挨拶ぐらいしろって。ま、お前がそういうやつだってのは分かってるけどよ。
Come on, you could at least greet me back. Well, whatever. I already know you're not that kind of guy.
なあ、この前 D 組の女子の話したよな。めったに学校来ねえけど、すげえ可愛い女子がいるって。
Hey, remember that chick I was talking about a couple weeks back? From Class D? You know, the super cute one that doesn't come to school that often?
その子、岸本綾瀬って名前なんだけどよ。
Her name's Kishimoto Ayase.
実は、その岸本に関して、すげえ発見したんだ。
Anyway, I discovered something absolutely insane about her. Misumi-kun suddenly lowered his voice, then looked around us. It was just going to be something vulgar, wasn't it? Already tired of his BS, I almost let out a sigh.
フェスいるだろ？フェス。
So, you know FES, right? But what he said made me bite it back.
その岸本ってのが、フェスなんだよ。
That Kishimoto chick, she is FES.
俺マジビビったぜ。まさかフェスがうちの学校の生徒だなんてよ。
That really threw me for a loop. I can't believe FES is a student at our school.
しかも、俺らとタメだってことだぜ。
And did you know she's in the same year as us, too? For whatever reason, Misumi-kun leaned his upper body out the window, then gazed up toward the sky with a look of pure ecstasy.
運命ってきっと、こういうことを言うんだな。
This has to be that fate thing everyone's talking about. This was the 3rd floor. If he were to slip, he'd fall to the ground and break his neck, ending his life just like that. My anxiety steadily climbed as I watched him. Misumi-kun leaned farther and farther and farther out the window, before switching his gaze down toward the entrance beneath it.
お、噂をすればなんとやらだタク。岸本を発見した。もうすぐここに来るぜ。
Oh shit, speak of the devil. Taku, I see Kishimoto. She'll be here any minute now.
え
With so many coincidences piling up one after the other, maybe it really was fate. Not that I cared.
よし、待ち構えてやる。見てろタク。俺のナンパ術ってのを見せてやるよ。
Alright, I'll be waiting to pounce on her here. I'll show you a thing or two about picking up chicks. Now, watch me work. He was brimming with self-confidence. Man, alpha males like him were really impressive. Picking up girls and all that was a completely different world for me. It wasn't even worth trying. A few moments later, FES, or Kishimoto Ayase, appeared. It was just like Misumi-kun said. She really was FES. I made sure of that while observing her from a safe distance. I still couldn't believe she was in the same year as us. She was wearing a Suimei uniform. A distinct aloofness came from her expression as she walked slowly down the hallway. It gave off a completely different impression than the one she'd had on stage. Back then, despite her apathetic tone, I'd felt a sense of power and liveliness emanating off of her. But now the aura she gave off felt listless and unapproachable. Ignoring this, likely deliberately, Misumi-kun strolled over to her with the same overly friendly attitude he always had with me, then casually stopped right next to her.
Yo, Kishimoto-san. Oh, hayo.
Yeah, Kishimoto-san, good morning. Whoa, his smile was so invigorating, despite being so obviously fake. I had no idea how he was able to act like that around someone he barely knew. That's why we love him. That's why we admire him. Then again, I didn't really want to be him.
あ、俺、三角大輔。よろしく。
Oh yeah, I'm Misumi Daisuke. Nice to finally meet you.
おっと、初対面とか思ってるだろう。でも違うんだな、これが。
Oh wait, that might make you think we haven't met before, right? But nope, not true.
俺さ、こないだ、ファンタズムのライブ行ったんだよね。だから、君に会うのは2度目。
So, I went to a Phantasm concert the other day, and you know what that means? It means it's our second time seeing each other.
で、その時君の歌声に、こう、なんつうのビビってきちゃったんだ。
And I just want to say, your voice from back then, how do I put this? It gave me the chills.
別に俺、ミーハーとかじゃねえよ。惹かれたのはさ、詩とか君の可愛さとか、そういうところもあるけど、でも何より、一番すげえって思ったのは、やっぱ、バンドとしての完成度っつうか。
And it's not like I'm the type of guy to follow the herd, you know. Sure, I was taken in by your lyrics and how cute you are and stuff like that, but what impressed me the most was how perfectly in sync you and your band were.
あの音あっての君の歌声っつうの？
You know, like how perfect their sound and your voice work together. You guys showed me what real harmony's like.
ちなみに俺も、実はバンドやりたいなーって思っててさ。よかったら、ああいういいバンドメンバーを見つけるコツとか、バンドの先輩としての心得みたいなもの、教えてくんねえかな。
Fun fact about me, I've always wanted to start a band. So if it's cool with you, could you tell me how to find some bandmates, or any other tips you think I should know?
あ、今すぐじゃ迷惑だろうから。そうだな。放課後とか暇？どっかで二人きりでじっくり話さない？
Oh, but that's kind of putting you on the spot, isn't it? So maybe not. Wait, I know. Are you free after school today? How about we go in and take some time to talk about it? Misumi-kun just kept on talking and talking with no breaks. His tone was different than usual, and it was obviously fake. Not only that, but he wasn't hitting on her directly, instead using the band angle in order to invite her somewhere nonchalantly. I'd never heard this fun fact about Misumi-kun wanting to start a band before. It had to be a lie. He was willing to go that far in order to win some points, to force a flag rather than obtaining it naturally? But... Alright, we'll start with the positive delusion. FES didn't even so much as look at him. He simply continued to walk down the hallway at the same pace, as if not a sound had reached her ears.
なあ、聞いてる？
Hey, are you listening? Suddenly, Fez stopped in her tracks. Her slightly lowered gaze slowly rose up, and then... She looked at me. Huh? Me? Come to think of it, the same thing had happened at the concert. It felt like Fez was staring directly at me. Just in general, I'd been stared at by a whole bunch of freaky 3D girls over the last couple of weeks. God, what the hell was going on? Was I becoming popular now?
私、好きな人がいるのよ。
There's already someone I like.
えマジ？何何？それって俺のこと？
Oh, really? Who is it? Could it be me?
そこの人、
The person over there.
そこ？
Over there? Over where? Where was she talking about? She wasn't pointing anywhere, nor doing anything that would clue us in as to who she was referring to. She just kept looking at me, and only me. Wait, was the person she liked me?
この前、ライブに来てたわね。
You came to my concert the other night. Ez began to walk toward me, still refusing to avert her gaze. My surroundings began to buzz. Everyone was listening in on the unexpected confession of Shibuya's famous songstress, FES.
いや、俺もライブに行って。
So, I think there's been a mistake. I came to the concert too.
一目で悟ったわ。
From a single glance, I knew. FES wasn't listening to a single thing Misumi-kun said. She grabbed my necktie with one hand and pulled me in close enough that I could clearly feel her breath against my skin. This was not a distance you could maintain with someone you were close friends with, nor was it one to be shared between family members. It was a distance, a closeness reserved only for lovers.
君が私の運命の人だって。
You are my companion, chosen by fate. With nary even a smile, FES slowly brushed my cheek with her fingertips. The sheer seductiveness of the gesture sent chills down my spine. I was entranced. FES had me. I couldn't take my eyes off her.
決めたわ。
I have made my decision.
私、君の
I will
お嫁さんになる。
become your bride. That declaration was so far removed from the normal aloofness and decadence that FES always carried, and yet the sheer contrast between them proved unbearably cute. Everyone around us was effectively throbbing with excitement upon hearing FES's proposal to me. Misumi-kun was utterly mortified upon losing to me that he came crashing down to his knees, crestfallen.
僕の意見は無視ですか？
Do I get a say in this?
嫌なの？
Do you not want me?
嫌じゃないです。
I don't not want you? It felt like I was being swept away by a river of temptation. If I got to marry a beautiful girl like her, I would win at life right then and there. And thus began the heart-pounding love story of me and FES. Like that had ever happened. While I was over here drowning in my moronic delusions, FES was murmuring something in a low voice, only to up and disappear soon after. The negative delusion? FES didn't even so much as look at him. She simply continued to walk down the hallway at the same pace, as if not a sound had reached her ears.
なあ、聞いてる？
Hey, are you listening? Suddenly, FES stopped in her tracks. Her slightly lowered gaze slowly rose up, and then she looked at me. Huh? Me? Come to think of it, the same thing had happened at the concert. It had felt like FES was staring directly at me. Just in general, I've been stared at by a whole bunch of freaky 3D girls over the last couple of weeks. God, what the hell was going on? Was I becoming popular now? You over there.
はい。
Yeah? When she called to me, I snapped to attention and replied. The otherworldly aura radiating off her entire body had me viewing her as someone older than myself. But then again, I knew for a fact that she and I were in the same year of school. FES signaled toward Misumi-kun, who had been following her around with a jerk of the chin.
付き合わない方がいいわよ。
You shouldn't
こん
associate
な人とは。
with someone like him.
おいおい、こんな人呼ばわりはひどくね？っていうか、こんな人ってどんな人だよ？
Oh, come on, that's not cool. That bites, you know, talking about someone like that. Besides, what's someone like him supposed to mean anyway?
鬱陶しい人。
A troublesome person.
は
Excuse me? Oh boy. The look on Misumi-kun's face turned very clearly sour, but FES left the sharp glint in his eye unanswered, letting it pass by her without any interest. What a nasty atmosphere. I didn't want to be involved in this. I was a total embarrassment when it came to fighting, be it physically or verbally. Besides, if I caused any problems at school, it'd have an impact on my evaluations. To avoid getting caught up in it, I should probably get out of here right away.
何もしかして岸本さんさ、俺のことバカにしてる
What? Kishimoto-san, you trying to make me look stupid?
別に。
Not particularly.
でも、迷惑よ。
You're simply a nuisance.
ふーん。あ、そうなんだ。
Oh, I see. So that's what's happening here.
そういうこと言うんだ。岸本さんって。
That's just how you talk, Kishimoto-san.
ちょっとさ、人のいないところで二人でゆっくり話そうぜ。
Hey, here's an idea. Let's go somewhere where we can be all alone. Then we can talk all you like, nice and slow. Misumi-kun placed a hand on Fez's shoulder, his smile trembling with rage. Her eyebrows twitched in response.
触らないで。
Do not touch me.
そう言うなって。いいからちょっと付き合ってよ。
No, don't be like that. Come on, let's get to know each other.
触らないでって言ってるの。
I told you not to touch me.
うっせえな。ついてこいって言ってんだよ。
No, shut up. I told you to come with me.
バカな人。
Ooh. It happened in an instant. Even though I'd seen the whole thing, I still couldn't comprehend exactly what had happened. Before I could even blink, that awesome mic stand, or maybe it was a sword, was now being held tightly in Fez's hand. I had no idea where she'd retrieved it from, but now she brandished it with incredible ease. And then... Misumi-kun's left hand was cleanly severed from his wrist. An explosion of blood erupted from the wound, and the severed hand fell to the floor. The hallway was turning crimson. I hadn't seen anything. I hadn't seen anything at all. I hadn't seen her draw her sword. I hadn't seen the trail of light it carved when it was swung. I hadn't seen Misumi-kun's arm get lopped off. It had all happened in the blink of an eye, and by the time I'd realized what had happened, it was already over.
手が俺の腕が
My hand, my arm, my arm! Misumi-kun collapsed on the spot, frantically picked up his hand and tried desperately to reattach it to his arm. His screams echoed throughout the hallway. All the students around us screamed and ran off in a panic. As for Fez, she was still holding her sword, calmly admiring the chaos. Then, for the second time, she looked at me. Her red tongue slowly cleaned her lips as a fierce blush dyed her cheeks, her smile stretching the color across her face.
気持ちいい。
This feels heavenly. No such carnage had unfolded. While I was over here drowning in my moronic delusions, Fez was murmuring something in a low voice, only to up and disappear soon after. Yeah, we'll do no delusion. Fez didn't even so much as look at him. She simply continued to walk down the hallway at the same pace, as if not a sound had reached her ears.
なあ、聞いてる
Hey, are you listening? Suddenly, Fez stopped in her tracks. Her slightly lowered gaze slowly rose up, and then... she looked at me. Huh? Me? Come to think of it, the same thing had happened at the concert. It felt like Fez was staring directly at me. Just in general, I'd been stared at by a whole bunch of freaky 3D girls over the past couple weeks. God, what the hell was going on? Was I becoming popular now? Naturally, I averted my eyes, so I'd only met her gaze for just a second.
見つけて。早く。
Your sword. Find it. Quickly. Suddenly, Fez spoke. Very little energy could be felt from her apathetic tone. I had no idea if those words were directed at me or Misumi-kun.
剣って
A sword?
そうすれば君は救われるわ。
If you do, you shall be granted salvation. When she finished whispering at what seemed like no one in particular, her eyes returned to the floor, and she began to walk away. She slipped straight past me and entered Class D. Misumi-kun and I watched her go, the two of us completely and utterly lost.
なあタグ
Hey, Taku. Misumi-kun was very clearly sulking. It must have been pretty rough to have had her completely ignore his entire existence. But I was used to that kind of thing.
俺はここまでプライドをズタズタにされたのは初めてだ
I've never had my pride torn to shreds like this before.
自信なくすぜくそ
You've lost your touch, Daisuke. Damn it.
ちょっと有名人だからって調子乗りやがって
What a bitch. All full of yourself just because you're a little famous.
あんな不愛想な女もう二度と相手にしてやるもんかよ
I won't even bother trying again with an antisocial bitch like her.
あーうぜえ
God damn it, this sucks ass.
だいたい何が剣を見つけろだわけわかんね
What was up with that finding a sword shit anyway? Made no sense to me. Sword. Could that possibly be referring to that mic stand thing she'd been using during the concert? Come to think of it, there'd been another person a couple days ago that had interrogated me about a sword. That Senna girl, the one who was absolutely terrifying. I'd actually thought she was gonna slice me in two. The sword she'd been carrying was a different shape than the one Fez had, but they had a similar aura to them. Could the two of them have been connected somehow? I didn't know. There was way too much shit I didn't know. Shogun, the demon girl, Yua, Fez, Senna, swords. As was my old habit, I jotted down a list of all the things I didn't know enough about in my head. I'd meant to put myself as one final item on the list, but I decided against it. I was completely normal. It was the stuff happening around me that wasn't. That was the most obvious conclusion. Was Fez my ally, or my enemy? It would be nice to know at least that much. Problem was, I didn't have the courage to ask her. Today, I headed straight for Animate without stopping at A Cafe. The reason, of course, was to finally pick up my long-awaited Bloodtoon figure, Seraton, post-awakening version. While I was in checkout, Yua's face crossed my mind for a second, but I cut off those thoughts immediately. I glanced at the Seratons that were set on display in order to attract customers, but since the sculptor was Kijima Yoshio, not a single word needed to be said about their quality. I had to get home fast so I could enjoy her every nook and cranny as soon as possible. As long as I could admire Seraton's face every now and then while I played ESO, I was content. So why did the entire third dimension do nothing but bring me trouble? It plagued me even now. I headed straight for my base in high spirits, forgetting all about Fez and swords and whatever else, and practically skipping the entire way home. When I was about 50 meters away, I encountered two men who carried an unmistakably abnormal air about them. I attempted to pass by them without making eye contact, but they were very clearly watching me.
そこの君、ちょっといいかい
You over there, could we have a moment? And with that, we'll have to wait till next time to find out more. But until then, class dismissed.